Hello there, lovely lady, and thank you so much for joining me on today's live, where we are going to be discussing the difference between this feminine and masculine approach and so much more as it relates to this topic. But first, I want to go ahead and put this in context and also give you an idea of where this came from and why it's so important that we talk about this right now. I'm also going to be going into what this really means. What does it mean, to have a masculine versus feminine approach, and also how it shows up in our workplace, but also answering a very big question, and that is, as women, do we need to bring more masculinity into the workplace in order for us to be heard and to be taken seriously and to be given those opportunities that we really want? And then I'm also going to be talking more about, if that's the case, or even if it's not, what is the right approach to take? How do we deal with this? How do we really just excel where we are and feel really good about who we are without needing to feel like we have to be someone else? So that's basically what we're going to be covering today. So what I want to start off by doing is putting this in context as far as how I'm going to approach this topic. So this is not a debate about whether, one approach is better than the other or anything like this. It's simply to provide the facts around what this is, how this shows up, and to give you an idea of how you can really make this work in your favor. So it's not that one is better than the other, or that men are somehow have this ability to be superior in some way in the workforce by being in this masculine energy, and we as females need to really push ourselves. It's nothing to do with that. But stick with me, and I'm going to unpack this in a way that is really going to work in your favor as a woman in the workplace. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is how this came up, because this seems to be a topic. It is a hot topic for sure, but it also came up recently because I've had a few women who have approached me and said things along the lines of, in my work environment, I work in a very male-dominated space. And it feels like if I don't really, be a little bit more forceful and aggressive, I don't get anywhere, because the men at work don't seem to respect me. They don't seem to value the work that I do. And I constantly get, what I want to talk about, and one of the reasons that I really want to address this is because, I've actually got this several different times. And when I worked in the corporate world, I worked in a very, very male-dominated field as well. So, I totally understand what it's like to kind of feel that way in that type of environment. But I also know, the approach that really works, and we're going to be talking about that as well. So that's how this conversation, came up, or this topic came up, is that I've heard so many times from women that it's, they show up in the best way they know how, but for some reason they just don't seem to get the respect that they deserve, and they just don't feel really understood, appreciated, and valued. And as a result of that, they don't get the opportunities they want, and they feel like they have to kind of be, a little bit more forceful, and they have to really push themselves really hard to get the results that they want and to actually be heard. So that's how this all came about, just to give you some background on that. So now, before I jump into the three things that I mentioned in this post, I want to start off by talking about this masculine versus feminine energy and how it shows up. So generally speaking, the masculine energy is where the people generally follow the lead of the person with the most authority or the most power. That's from a masculine standpoint. The masculine energy tends to focus more on a goal or specific task, so it tends to be really focused very intensely on that goal or task and getting it done, and may not be completely aware of other things that are going on around them, or maybe even other things that could impact that end goal. So that's masculine energy. And I'm not talking about this in terms of males versus females. I'm talking about this in terms of masculine energy and feminine energy. And the reason I say that is because we all have an element of masculine energy and feminine energy, both men and women. So I'm talking specifically about masculine energy and feminine energy in this context. So like I said, the masculine energy would be more focused on a very specific task or goal, and may not necessarily be aware, or may not take a lot of other things that are going on around them into consideration, just because their focus is so they are so focused on that end goal. So those are just some examples of how examples of masculine energy. And again, even as females, we have masculine energy as well. So feminine energy, on the other hand, shows up in terms of building consensus. So, and wanting to build buy-in, and it's more relational versus the masculine energy. It also, of course, it involves a lot of people, ideas. There's always this this need or this desire to want to reach out and get buy-in from everyone and make sure that the right people are involved and things like that. The only downside to that in terms of this energy is that sometimes in our quest to do that, in our quest to get buy-in from everyone, make sure everyone's involved in the process, it can take a little bit longer, and there is a little bit of a risk to get paralyzed in the process in getting to that end goal. So again, the differences that I just explained are simply masculine energy versus feminine energy. It's not males versus females. So we all have in us masculine energy and feminine energy. And this is how the examples I gave is how that masculine energy can show up really strong in men and women, and then how the feminine energy can show up really strong as well. So there is that. And here's why it matters, right? Because if we only have masculine energy at work, whether that's men or women showing up in that masculine energy, again, like I talked about before, the focus would be so just very specifically on the goal. People tend to follow people who have the most authority in terms of that masculine energy. And so there's pros and cons to both. Same with the feminine energy, and I mentioned this as well, that the feminine energy tends to be more relational, more all-inclusive, buy-in, all those kinds of things. But then, of course, the downside to that can potentially be that there's, they can kind of get lost in the weeds with all of that. So I hope that kind of makes sense as far as there's so many ways to distinguish it, but I think that's one easy way to distinguish the feminine and masculine energy. So now let's talk about, this is the big question, right? Do we need to be more masculine in order for us to be heard and to be seen? So before I get into that part of it, what I want to do is give you some very specific examples about how this shows up before I answer the question of, actually this is going to help me to answer that question of, do we need to step more into our masculine energy? So here again are some examples. One is when it comes to focusing on the work, again, the masculine energy is going to be more goal focused in terms of work, versus feminine energy is going to be more process focused. Then influence. The masculine energy is going to be more the command type of influence, so more of a top-down approach, whereas the feminine energy is going to be more in terms of persuasion and relationships and getting everyone on board. Then the work style, masculine energy is going to fall more on the side of competing versus feminine energy, which is going to be more collaborative. And then in terms of conflict and how we handle conflict in feminine and masculine energy, the masculine energy is going to tend to be more direct in those situations, whereas the feminine energy tends to be more indirect. So now let me go and answer the question around, do we need to be more in the masculine? And here is basically my take on it. There is definitely, from two different angles, there's basically huge value to having both, not just within ourselves, so showing up appropriately, of course, in the workplace, in our feminine and our masculine energy as appropriate, but also in terms of having a diverse or well-balanced work culture and work environment. It's so important that there is both this masculine and feminine energy that shows up in the work environment, because like I said before, there's pros and cons to both, and there's been many studies that have proven how beneficial it is when you do have that balanced workforce between the masculine and the feminine. And of course, as you all know, there's this whole big movement, right, around getting more women into leadership positions and things like that, because of course there's a huge benefit in bringing our style and our own femininity into it as well. But having said that, that doesn't mean that we as females always function from this feminine energy. We don't, because if we did, then when it comes to, say, leadership as an example, if we didn't have the balance between the two, like I mentioned earlier, there could be a tendency to be so much in the process, so much focused on the people and the relationships, that we lose sight of the goals. But as we all know, with being high achieving women, we have this focus. We are able to focus on the goals and get be direct and get to the point and be directive from a leadership perspective when needed. So the key to answering that question of whether or not we need to be more aggressive and more forceful and more in our masculine really comes down to this. Number one, two very important things. Number one, knowing yourself very, very well. So as females, we tend to have more of this feminine energy and more of a feminine approach. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, the key is, and this is that number one, the key is knowing how to step into that in a way that still gives you the results, in the way that makes you feel true to who you are and still gives you the results that you want, but also knowing how to tap into that masculine part of you, that masculine energy part of you, to get you to those results in a way that feels good to you. Without knowing how to balance that for yourself, you feel out of integrity, you get very frustrated and very stressed out at work, you feel like you're constantly in conflict with other people, especially maybe the males in your environment, because you feel like they're constantly disrespecting you, maybe undervaluing you, and you just don't feel like you're getting anywhere in terms of that environment. So you need to know how to balance that masculine and feminine for yourself. But of course, as females, we tend to be more on the feminine side, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We don't have to feel like we have to dig so deep to draw out that masculine energy in order for us to be effective. That is not the case at all. I have found this to be true in my own experience and even with my clients, and I'll actually give you an example of that in a moment. But it's knowing how to tap into that feminine side of us in a way that really makes us stand out, but also knowing how to tap into that masculine side of us when needed, but staying in our integrity when we do so, so that we still feel like it's so much part of who we are when we show up at work and do what we need to do. And I'm going to tell you something very interesting as well from a male perspective. And I've asked, I've chatted with several men about this. And this is their take. I mean, men that are very strong males in leadership positions and things like that. But this is their take. This is what they have observed, is that when a woman shows up completely confident and completely in her feminine energy and owns that and leads from that perspective, they are blown away by it. It really, it makes them sit back and take notice, and it really makes them respect us as women when we're able to be more authentic and in ourselves. So, I hope that resonates with you and you kind of take that to heart. And it doesn't mean that you have to be so much in the masculine and be somebody that you're not in order to get you to where you want to go. So I hope that's helpful to you. Then number one, we talked about your, just managing yourself and your own energy and how you show up. But number two is being able to be very much in tune and in key with the people that you're working with. And here's what I mean by this. We need to know how to communicate really well. We need to know how to read people, how to understand people, how to connect with people on a deep level, even people you may not agree with at work, maybe people you've got into a conflict with in the past. And it's never too late. Even in those situations, I've proved that to myself over and over, that those relationships can really turn around. But you need to, number one, do, what I said before in terms of being really clear about who you are, what you bring to the table, and how you can show up authentically as yourself, your feminine self, but also how to really bring that to the table, even if you're in a male-dominated field with a lot of masculine energy. It absolutely works, and it can and will work for you. I've proven this for myself, and a lot of my clients have had incredible success with this as well. But you also need to know, the second half of that equation is you also need to know how to communicate and really, have those really strong professional relationships. And that takes understanding other people, knowing what to do, what to say, how to ask the right questions. So you really get to the heart of what's the best way to communicate with somebody, even if it's the most difficult, challenging person that you've ever worked with. You need to know how to work with those people. You need to know how to really understand them at their core, know what's important to them, know how to communicate with them in a way that's going to make them sit up and take notice. And, where you also feel valued in that relationship. And there's definitely a way to do both of those things. And that's what I help my clients with so much, is number one, getting clear on who they are so they can step fully into their value and their power and their confidence and show up in that way and get incredible results, because of that. But also how to really show up in a way that honors the people that they're working with, whether or not they've had a difficult relationship with them in the past. And how to, so it's emotional intelligence, it's just communication, it's being authentic and true to yourself, And it's not being, it's not being a people pleaser, but knowing how to set those boundaries in a way that works and creates win-win situations day after day. So that's really the secret to all of this, to this masculine and feminine energy. It's not that one is better than the other. It's not that men are completely in their masculine energy all the time, or females are completely in their feminine energy all the time. But even us as females need to know how to balance that masculine and feminine energy for ourselves in a way that feels authentic and true to us. And not, where we don't feel the need to be aggressive, forceful, pushy, any of those things, because it doesn't show up in the right way, as you all know. I've had way too many ladies tell me that they felt the need to do this, but it still doesn't give them the results that they want. So there's definitely a way to do it in a way that works for you. But also you need to be able to understand and know people very well from a couple of different perspectives. And that's really what, that's a whole other conversation, a whole other story. But if you need help with both of those areas, number one, knowing your unique value and how to position yourself in a way that people sit up and take notice, they ask for your opinion, and where you feel really valued and respected, then I would invite you to, reach out to me. And also, if you're on the other side, or maybe you need help in both areas, where you feel really good about yourself, you're really confident, but at the same time you're having difficulties with your professional relationships at work, then I invite you to reach out to me as well. And I want to give you an example from one of my clients, Arti. So Arti is just an incredible person. And she recently went through a job interview process, and she showed up completely 100% authentic and true to who she was, and let her femininity shine, and just was so so confident in who she was as a result of going through this process, and just really just didn't allow that to stop her. She didn't need to be forceful. She didn't need to let the masculine energy overpower her femininity or who she was, but she showed up completely authentically in her own power. And in her own words, she said that she really felt like she found her voice and found her power through this whole process in a way that allowed her to get this huge opportunity that she has now, with earning a lot more money, having a lot more influence and authority at work and things like that. So that just goes to show that you really don't need to try to be somebody you are not. You don't need to match. If somebody else in the office has an incredible amount of masculine energy, you do not need to unnaturally match that energy in order to get the results that you want. And if you want to know how to do this in a way that feels good to you and is more in line with who you are, and bring out your true value so that you can get the results that you want, and know how to authentically engage with other people in a way where you create a win-win situation and they feel heard, valued, and respected, while you still maintain who you are, your integrity and your boundaries, then I invite you to reach out and chat with me, and I will tell you more about how to do that. You can go to sharissasebastian.com/schedule to schedule a call with me, and I will go ahead and post the link below. As always, if you have any other questions or thoughts on this, I would love to hear from you. You can feel free to comment below, and I would love to hear if this resonates with you, if it helped you in any way, if it gave you any more insight, if you learned anything from it that maybe you didn't realize before. I would love to hear from you. So thank you so much for watching. Again, if you'd like to chat with me, go to sharissasebastian.com/schedule. I'll put the link below. Just click through, and I look forward to chatting with you soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.